Hello, everybody. My name is Noz Urbina. Welcome to the Truth Collapse podcast. I am very happy to have Amir Feizpour with me for one of our first interview episodes. Um, I have recently met Amir, and we were just over on the Omnichannel X podcast, which you probably know if you're listening to this, where the Truth Collapse podcast was recently launched. Amir is a very well-rounded. I'm going to call you expert in the AI world. I always feel weird when people call me an expert, so I'm sympathizing. Um, and we're going to take the conversation beyond what we usually talk about, which is kind of like how can we apply this in business? How can we be more productive? How can we generate more revenue? To what the heck are we doing here? And what are some of the other potential impacts of AI once deployed widely? Not just generative AI, but all types of AI and automation algorithm that have been affecting our society for many years, and are only going to affect our society faster and more profoundly in the years to come. So hopefully it's not going to be all doom and gloom. Um, we're gonna talk about what could go wrong, why it could go wrong, but also maybe trying to kick around some approaches and ideas about how we could make it better. So, Amir, do you want to introduce yourself to the group? Because not everybody will have heard your introduction over at Omnichannel X.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Naz. I'm excited to talk about this. So, as I said in the other podcast, I'm a recovering quantum physicist and recovering data scientist. In the past 5 years, I've been playing around in the entrepreneurship world, trying to find my way. I'm very, generally speaking, excited about the topic of knowledge management and knowledge work. And, since we've been thinking for the past several decades that knowledge work is a sacred thing for humans and machines cannot touch it. More recently, I'm also very, very interested in the topic of future of work and more specifically, future of knowledge work, which I think brings us to this discussion.
Well, I think it's a fantastic transition. So let's start at the future of knowledge work, because we were talking about the future of work and tasks at a more kind of granular level, or let's say a zoomed in level. Why don't you zoom out and talk a little bit about what you think knowledge work is going to look like going forward? Maybe give a very simple definition of what you think knowledge work is, and then how do you think knowledge work is going to change going forward?
Yeah, I think knowledge work came up in the last couple of decades in the context of moving away from factory work to the type of work that requires some level of cognitive. I mean, of course, factory work needed cognitive work, but the majority of work was, muscle work and, pulling on levers and as a follow-up to the farming work that was happening before that. So knowledge work is you sit somewhere and most of the time it is your head, your brain that is crunching things and going through information. So think, finance, think legal work, think data science, think software. So these are the types of things we call knowledge work because mostly you're sitting somewhere and using your knowledge to produce value. And where it is going is interesting because up to probably 2 years ago, and even art, I would say, it is kind of tangential to knowledge because most of the time it is really created in your brain and then, you use tools to demonstrate it on a canvas or in a piece of music and all that. So and these were things that, creative work, knowledge work, these were things that were very sacred and reserved for humans
A
because
machine could never do.
right, absolutely. And then all of a sudden, 3 years ago, Stable Diffusion came out, and then after that, ChatGPT came out, and all of those things at, that targeted very directly the very the very thing we considered very human, right? So then this question of, oh, wait a minute, maybe the mechanical work that robots will take over one day, like driving and factory work and etc., are actually more safe than the cognitive work, the brain work that we thought was reserved for us. So where it is going is very, very hard to predict. So it is very difficult to know in 30 years where it will be. But what I'm guessing that will happen over the next 10 years is that we are going to see more and more what I call multi-agent, multiplayer human machine collaboration. So we are going to see, I have this slide in one of my presentations where I'm saying, in my opinion, probably hope in 2034, a founder is a person that has a bunch of arms. And some of these arms are, machines that are doing the sales and marketing work and engineering work and operational work. But one of the important arms is the human and machine resources, right? Because it is probably
H and M and R.
exactly, that's exactly what I have in my slide, that essentially the workers become, some of the workers will become agents and machines that are collaborating with you as a founder, as a business owner, to carry out a bunch of the mundane or the bunch of maybe more complex work even that can just be delegated to machines. There is no need for human to be involved in. So that, at least in the next 10 years, in the near term, I think we are going to see a lot more than that, like just essentially people that collaborate with machines to get work done.
So I'm going to give some examples that people may not have heard of. So it was a little while ago, I would say maybe a year ago, which is 100 years in artificial intelligence time. But I think it was ChatGPT 4. Right after it went public, someone said to it, "You have, I don't know, $1,000 or $500, whatever. Um, Create a business plan and tell me what to do, and I will go do everything you tell me. How can we start making money?" And it decided to launch a t-shirt company. It's like, we're going to write a custom t-shirt company. You're going to create go start a Shopify store or whatever it recommended, set up this and that. And it started allocating, $18 here, $5 there. And the guy was making money. He was running a profitable business. And what would he have been so profitable if it was, if it didn't go viral because it's such a weird idea? Like, he got all this free marketing from the fact that his idea was was new. It was new to the public. So journalists were talking about it. Who knows whether it would have been successful? But that's the concept. As he said, "All right, AI, you're the CEO. I'm the executive. I'm the execution team. Tell me what to do." And he gave this a budget to ChatGPT, and he was able to make a profitable business. I would have to go Google the story, but or see how profitable it became. But I remember it being quite successful. And then now, a year later, we're hearing talk of the $1 billion solo enterprise. If I have good ideas and I know this technology well, can one person be a billion or multi-billion dollar and multinational essentially? So I think that that's very interesting, and I have and we mentioned this on the other podcast. I've always been very fast to encourage people to not think of AIs as singular tools. I think that we hear ChatGPT and like we use the app, and it's very quick and very easy for us to kind of identify these things with the apps that we're familiar with as if it's a single thing, when you should really be thinking about it like electricity, or like just computation itself. People were saying things like, this AI will be like spell check. It will be in everything you touch. And different AIs with different purposes, all interacting with each other. And you and your team members are part of this extended virtual team.
Yeah, absolutely. Electricity is a very interesting example. One interesting analogy I've heard, this is definitely not my idea, I'm regurgitating it, but electricity did something very interesting to factories, because prior to that, factories were built around a steam engine, because you had this steam engine that was pushing things around. It was a very well-defined thing in the middle of the factory. So the layout of the factory had to be designed around where that thing was. So for more power-hungry machines, had to be closer to it. The other ones had to be farther apart. So it was dictating how the factory was organized. But
Hmm.
all of a sudden, electricity came along and said, oh, actually, you don't need this, layout because the power can go anywhere in the factory at the level you need it. So it just removed a massive constraint of how work was designed and how it was being done. So all of a sudden, the design, the environment changed because there was this new enabler that had a very different property that dictated the design of the work later. And later with robotic process automation, with robotic arms in the factories, probably that also changed how it was happening. And this is exactly what you're describing, that this is going to happen to all of our lives because we are living our lives in a very specific way because of the limitations that we know or not
That
exist
we perceive or
around,
not. Yeah.
right, exist around how we work and how we live. But when these limitations are removed, when I don't have to click on things anymore, I can just talk to them. When I don't have to click on every single step of the way, and I can just say, go do these things and come back when you're done, or let me know if you need any help, that's just going to completely change how we work. Even the definitions of corporates, in my opinion, is probably something that will be touched because if a lot of the value that middle managers provide is coordinating work, communicating work, priorities, alignment, etc., and all of a sudden we have machines that can do this better, can very quickly onboard a gig worker and offboard them without loss of information or engagement. What does it mean to have corporates going forward, right? So these are very, very interesting questions.
The shape of teams, the shape of team dynamics, the shape of. So you're inspiring me two things that I don't want to forget. One is the reorganization, and I love the example of reorganization of physical spaces, and the other is the sense of value, of self value. So at the individual level, what do I bring to the table? You know, and people, I've seen this with the silliest things. Um, People identify. Well, to take the example of I don't mean to be patronizing, but the coal miners in the U.S. Coal miners all over the world who are losing these coal mining jobs, which are not nice jobs. Like they're dangerous. They're high effort, etc. But there's a pride in your work, and there's an identification with what you do as part of who you are. Like it's one of the first things we ask each other at parties. What do you do? You know, it's hugely important to our sense of identity. And then gig working and technology is already kind of starting to eat away at that a little bit. Like we don't have the same career. We don't invest ourselves in a career the same way. And the other one, when we can go either direction, but I don't want to forget this before, without saying it, is the reorganization of spaces, because there's wonderful examples about that. For example, I've got three that come to my top of my head. One is the reorganization of the living room.
Mm. Yes.
Living rooms used to point at the coffee table. They would like the factory analogy you gave. We used to have a coffee table or a table in the middle, and we would put seating all around it because people would look at each other.
Right.
And then we invented TVs,
Yes.
and living rooms got oriented so that everything looks at the television. So it just our most intimate shared living space. Technology reorganized it, and nobody really cared or noticed. Like it kind of happened very organically, um, and thankfully, I guess very slowly. And something that I don't know if people are aware of, I was just reading a report about this. It's starting to change architecture.
Mm.
So the new homes that are being built we used to have, like, everyone wanted these big, expansive spaces. We wanted a big living room, big den, and they have these big open kitchens that go through these big hallways, these big shared social spaces, back when we wanted to talk to each other. So now, instead of just the living room being reorganized so we stare at a screen, the whole house is being optimized for more private spaces so that we can all go away and be on our devices and get on and connect with our online communities and so on. So people, like, why are we paying for all this square footage and square meterage
Yeah.
to just have this open huge space when nobody's going to do like stuff in it? And so as life moves more online, it's actually changing houses. And the other example, which I love, which is not as cool as those two, but I just there's a quirkiness about it, which is I think people don't realize how you couldn't have skyscrapers before you had telephones.
Interesting.
People think of the elevator,
Yeah.
like how do you move stuff up and down? But if you're going to have an office building, how do you move messages up and down? Like the amount of information that needs to move up and down within a building, once you get up beyond a certain height, it becomes untenable. Like you cannot be like running tubes or boxes with letters in them. Like it just becomes impractical to move information up and down a narrow building like that. So our ability to build tall, high buildings is also affected by information technology.
Right.
And I love this stuff. So it impacts our physical spaces, and then it also reorganizes society.
Right.
So when we're already talking about how it impacts like lawyers and judges, and how we deal out medical insurance, how does a society who working in this way look? How do you what do you see us doing differently, or what's going to happen? Tell me everything, Amir.
I have all the answers. I do not. Um, there, the physical world impact, as you're saying, is quite interesting. Like that's a fascinating topic, and the good thing about it is that it is more imaginable, right? Like it is physical. We can imagine what it will look like. But the part that is very, very mysterious to me is the impact it will have on the emotional landscape and the future of meaning, as you were talking about, is interesting. It is so interesting because in my own journey, I went from like science to engineering, and then like being obsessed with science, and then being obsessed with engineering, then being obsessed with knowledge work, then now being obsessed with future of work. And if you follow this dotted line, the next step of it is future of meaning, because work is so tied to our identity, as you were saying, probably for millennia. Like you were a farmer boy, therefore, because your parents and grandparents and all of them were working on a farm. That's even in my culture in Iran. Even we have like the occupations of our previous generations as the last names of people. Like literally, your last name could be carpenter or whatever.
Well,
And
we still have we have that in English.
oh, really? Okay,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
interesting.
Well, you have people who are like Smith.
Right,
One of the most common names comes from
absolutely.
blacksmith,
Oh,
and
really? Interesting.
and there's several other examples. I would have to Google them, but there's several
Yeah.
other examples of that.
Oh,
And then you have other modifications like goldsmith
hmm.
and other things like that.
Right. So absolutely. So identity is so close that you're naming yourself, your whole family after, oh, this is what we do, right?
Now, yeah, not only me,
Right.
we
We
for
are this.
generations.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because the example you gave about when I meet somebody else, first thing is I ask them, what do you do? Since I've become very obsessed with this future of meaning, instead of that, I started asking people, what is your story? And people have such a hard time answering that question. It is unbelievable how much of a wrench in their wheels that is. Because I'm saying, what's your story? And they're like, um, what do you mean? Like, I'm an engineer. And I'm like, I didn't ask and I push them purposefully because I want to explore how they're thinking. Like I say, I didn't ask, what do you do? Or they might just go on a rant. I'm an engineer. I work at Google. I do blah, blah. I do this. I do that. My manager was this. Before this, I was a developer at whatever. And then I'm like, so your story is what you do then, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's not what you asked me.
You
Okay.
asking me my resume, my job
Right.
history.
Right. Absolutely. And it's so interesting because people do not have, they have a much hard time to just separate themselves from this. I recently wrote this article called Purpose Gap, where I'm talking about, and again, like that's not a concept I came up with that exists, but I wrote my take on it. But that's exactly this, that, our identities are so tied to one thing, and it is usually the work, that when that's going bad or good or whatever, we're just going through these waves of, happiness, and then, dismay and failure. And, I talked there about identity diversification, for example. Like, essentially, you have to purposefully, like you do financial diversification for robustness purposes, you have to do
Hmm.
this identity, because going forward, if the work is taken away from you, if you are given the choice to spend your time any way you want because you don't need to work to be alive,
Or,
then
or
what?
or 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 your work keeps changing so fundamentally every
Right.
little while that
Absolutely.
you
Right.
can't
Absolutely.
anchor onto it.
Yeah, like the near term is 100% what you're saying. Like, and I've also written about change of job description, like loss of job description versus loss of job. I don't think loss of job is the right way to talk about what's happening. Loss
Huh.
of job description is what is happening.
I love it.
Because you're 100% right that in near term, that even like before all of this jazz, the job of data scientist, which was the sexiest job of whatever, what's changing? Like in 3 years that I worked as a data scientist, the job description in year one and year three were completely different.
Hmm.
And now this is happening like literally every week. Like every week there's a new thing to learn. Every few days there's a new thing that has to be on your radar. So where is this going? It's going to take a lot of emotional toll on people, right? So that's, more than all of the doomsday conversations about AI taking over. I'm worried about emotional backlash of people because they're not ready to go through this pace of change to the new place that they need to go. But what can go right is that we create infrastructure to support people through this emotional journey and end up in a society where humans and machines coexist and collaborate and build together, and you have a lot of fun good things.
Well, I love of everything you just said. I love loss of job description as a concept. To put a name on a phenomena that we're going to see. But the one of the most positive and new things, I've never heard someone say this, is the identity diversification. Spreading out where we get our sense of self and finding a sense of self in things other than labor,
Yes.
whether that's knowledge work or physical work, etc. But I don't know if you know this, but and I sadly I have not lived there long enough to be able to speak on it expertly. But my wife is French, and in France is the only culture I've ever heard of where it's considered a little bit tacky by a lot of people to ask, "What do you do?"
Interesting.
It's like because you're supposed to talk about more important things
Right.
than work, but that's the only people on earth I think that do that. Everybody else is very, and it's such a French thing, which is why they're so wonderful. But yeah, I think that's a skill set, and I'm thinking about it's taking me off in all sorts of different directions. I'm thinking about we're when we're coming back to reorganizing the home, and I'm thinking about things like would gender equality be what it is if we had not been able to equalize the access to other opportunities that weren't in the home. If the home couldn't be more automated, and there was so much labor in the home, that could the family structure have survived gender equality? Like, we needed those things. The industrial revolution was a precursor for allowing us to say, hey, wait a minute, these people are getting an unfair situation, and there is another way. You know, people suffer and people suffer inequalities when there's no perceived alternative. And the same thing with what's happening with gender and identity today. Could you have as many communities, and can you have the diversity that we have if people couldn't find each other online?
Right. Right.
I'm LGBTQ. I know that being able to connect with your people online is a fundamental part of navigating the world. And without the internet, I shudder and shake to think what was for people like, and for some people still today, in smaller communities that are not connected, where they don't have physical or telecommunications ability. Like, they can't move and they can't reach other people to talk about who they are and what they're thinking. Um, so yeah, I've lost myself there, but I'm
Yeah.
deeply fascinated by what you're saying.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very interesting example that you gave there. Um, because the way I arrived at identity diversification was through my entrepreneurship journey, because I've been at this for 5 years now. And, the majority of this 5 years, I've been in this fragile state of trying to figure out who I am because my identity was so tightly coupled with entrepreneurship. And, over the last year or so, where I have sort of tried to reimagine and reframe and rebuild my relationship to all of these topics, including, my own mental health and all of those, emotional landscape of how I'm going through life, I ultimately came to this conclusion that, part of anti-fragility, as people talk about it, is this diversification, because it decouples you from these things. And it is such an enabler, such an empowerment, because when you start thinking about it, then, all of these technologies, all of these different things, instead of a threat, they become enablers. They become a new ways of doing work. And one of the things that I'm super excited about is the equalizing power of, technology for people to do things that are meaningful to them. Like, I would not have been an entrepreneur that I am today, probably even 10 years ago, because cloud was not there that much,
Mm.
access to capital was not there that much, online access to a community of 5,000 AI people who teach me things and send me leads, and all of that was not there. So a lot of the things that I'm imagining today, and I'm like, a few hours later, I'm executing them, they would not have been available to me. I still feel super constrained because, oh, I'm not white, I'm not tall enough, I'm not from Stanford, I'm not, hanging out with San Francisco people, et cetera, et cetera. But imagine, or, I'm not a very good engineer. But imagine that, all of these things become more available through this type of technology that you're talking about. So somebody who is, I'm privileged to be where I am, but somebody who is, a lot less privileged as I am can still do the type of things I'm doing, right? Like, that's amazing. Like, that's a society I want to live
Ah, okay, so I love it and it terrifies me. So I totally get it, and I think I've had, for example, I've worked with gig workers who are taking contracts on sites like Fiverr or TaskRabbit, where you just go on and go, I need a business card designed, or I need a PowerPoint template, or I need a whatever. And somebody in Indonesia or Ghana, who has an internet connection and a computer is able to make an amount of money which would be completely inaccessible to them in another way. But on the flip side of that, I go, yeah, but the one who has an internet connection and a computer. And as much as this has enabled so many people to have access to opportunities, it's also enabled people who had opportunities to have access to opportunities the likes of which only God could imagine in his most
in.
luxurious dreams. Like, there has never been people as rich and
Yeah.
richer. Like, we're getting beyond kings and emperors here. Like, the amount of concentration of wealth, because all this opportunity, there's always that tax that the platform and the providers are able to take. And when we talk about kind of post-labor economies, and Sam Altman from OpenAI is already talking about I don't know what he calls it, something or other coin, like some sort of cryptocurrency, where basically you just give me all of your biometric data, like your eyes and your fingerprints and everything about you, and then we will pay you what is it called? Universal basic income. We'll
Mm.
pay you to exist when we take your job away. Um, but he never ever talks about the fact that we're sort of taking a photograph of the current inequality and solidifying it. So if everybody doesn't work anymore and there's no longer any movement of wealth, that's really great for the people who had it when the music stopped.
Yes. Uh, this is a very interesting topic. and I'm not going to pretend to be qualified to talk about it. Like I'm not an
We're all
economist.
qualified. We're all qualified.
And
No one
I
knows what the
think
hell's going on.
I have a more optimistic point of view though. Like compare who is able to make money and build a business today compared to 5 decades ago.
Yeah.
A black person, a Mexican in America, an Iranian guy that happens to be in Canada now, right? Like all of us have almost, you're absolutely right that there's a difference, but compared to where 5 decades ago things were, we have significantly more opportunities.
Yeah.
And if I'm a betting man, again, going back to the topic of diversification, I would bet on the fact that if you diversify enough, we are talking about the power law distribution of wealth in the society. And,
What law of distribution of wealth?
like a power law, like uh, um, like essentially the idea is that the way things are distributed is that a small, like the 20/80 rule comes from that, right? Essentially the idea is that 20% of the society has 80% of the wealth. The
Mm-hmm.
rest of the society is this long tail of being poor.
Right. Okay.
uh,
So the laws around power.
yes.
Ah,
Well, I
gotcha.
mean, it comes from
No,
the,
no, I don't mean
the
like the laws,
yeah,
like our
right.
legal laws. I mean like the observable, consistent power dynamics in societies.
Um, I'm not sure if that's where the name comes from, but
Okay.
anyway, we can get to mathematics, but that's probably outside of the scope of this conversation. Like, let's say the 20/80 rule, right? So 20% of the society has 80% of the wealth, and that's probably applicable to a lot of things. And what is happening is that there is a long tail of being poor because most of the society is poor compared to wealthy people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just, having enough to be existent, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And essentially what technology has done is that a bunch of people in this, very long tail of wealth, right? People who are like just have enough to be alive, all of a sudden, my parents were normal employees of companies and offices and whatever. I am an entrepreneur, which is like a step function different than what they were. Probably my kids are going to be superpower, super entrepreneurs or whatever that will be, right? So this equalizing power of technology is creating that diversification. And a brilliant example of this that I really like is that think about investment space. Like uh, even a decade ago, a lot of investors were just a bunch of finance bros. Today, we have a lot of techies, people who color of skin is like mine, their background is like mine, their thought process is like mine. They have made a shitload of money. Sorry, I can't be swearing this. They have made a lot of money,
No, feel
and
free.
they are investing in businesses like me. Like this is equalizing. This is it's not only the technology, like just the fact that diversification happened, that technology became available, and these people made a lot of money, means that people who are more like me are now in position of power, and they are empowering me to exist and flourish. So yes, it can go where you're describing, but also I think the only robust way that we can prevent it from going there is
Mm.
this diversification that is happening, empowered by technology.
Okay, I love it. I love it. Of course I love it. I want to be positive, and I do see the benefits. I guess the reason I launched this podcast was how do we get the benefits and minimize the transition pain? Because I think I hope you agree with me. The transition pain is unavoidable.
Absolutely.
There's going to be massive transition pain. The question is, how do we shorten that and minimize it? How can we make the stumbling less? Are you familiar with the Reformation?
No.
So the Reformation is the fracturing of the church because they used to
Okay.
just be, I don't know if they were called, I don't know what they were called at the time. Um, oh, actually, you know what? I'm probably showing my own lack of knowledge here. It was some in the many fracturings of Christianity. It was one of the biggest. And I should know this better. I'm really making myself look like a fool here for bringing it up, but not remembering. But basically, if my memory serves, it was the fracturing between Catholics and Protestants. and it was immediately preceded by the printing press. So the world was flooded with an information technology that it was not ready for.
Yeah.
And the people who were printing these Bibles were very they were sure that it was going to bring consensus and unification because everyone would be able to read the truth for themselves.
Mm.
And of course, they could immediately started disagreeing. And the removing of the old social structure, the organization
Right.
of society, of okay, you don't know how to read, you couldn't afford a book in 100 lifetimes, so you come to this huge golden building where the one person in the town who knows how to read tells you what's in the book. That was a structure that lasted for hundreds of years, and everyone was kind of happy with it, more or less. But then once everyone started having access to these books, and you lifted up different parts of society, there was brother killing brother in the streets of Amsterdam.
Mm.
It ripped societies apart. And there's this line that runs through Europe. North of Spain, halfway through France, kind of just touching the bottom of Germany, where it switches from Catholic to Protestant. It ripped Europe in half, literally. And there's a border that exists to
Right.
this day, due to this social fracturing. And I am constantly talking about the Reformation 2.0,
Mm.
which is when you introduce now this rate of information change, which is so fast that there has to be a period of societal reorganization. I think that's inevitable.
Yep.
And that's never clean or pretty.
Yes.
But I love. I'm going to keep coming back to For me, the ray of light, like the lightning moment of this whole conversation, has been identity diversification. Is because there's this interplay between the social and the individual. That we destabilize as a society because we're destabilized as individuals by a situation, and I think that is such a wonderful message. Is there places people can learn more about that? You said you wrote a piece about it.
I did write a piece about it. One of my friends recently told me that that idea exists also in a book. She sent me a link. I can look that up and send it to you as well. But yeah, I mean, absolutely agreed with everything you said. Like essentially the pace of the difference, the pace of the change is huge. What I'm very hopeful about and optimistic about, I'm generally speaking a very cynical person, but in this particular case, I'm hopeful because the fact that people like you and I are thinking about it, and the human aspect of it is part of our conversation and discourse, I think is very important and positive. The very, very good example that I would love to draw from is climate change, right? Because for the longest time, we thought that okay, climate tech is this altruistic thing that only people who really care about the environment and earth will do. But we have a lot of VC backed companies that are doing climate friendly type of work. We have a lot of startups that are well funded and making a lot of money that are working in privacy tech. These are examples of showing that, again, like that diversification, like people who are not only finance bros are building companies that are impacting the world, that are shaping the world we are going to,
Mm-hmm.
that do care about a broader set of parameters, and that diversification of what people care about hopefully will also create a set of tools that will educate the other 99% of the society to think differently, to live differently, to seek different types of meanings, and go towards a society that is more prepared to deal emotionally and also physically to deal with these kind of new world that we're going to. And
Awesome.
regulation is never going to change that, right? Like no regulation is going to fix any of these problems. Like really, it will come from grassroots type of movements of people building tools that will empower people to think differently.
So the podcast is called Truth Collapse, and we've been talking about how you find your personal truth of who you are, identity truth. Um, and I think you just raised another thing, which I think is another awesome takeaway from this conversation, which I'm very happy about, which is how do we make the defense of a sense of stability? How can we defend what's true in a world that where you can manipulate reality automatically? How do we defend what's true? How do we defend our stability and our identity? And how do we make that profitable? What are the business
Absolutely.
models if there we took us decades to find the business models to make our physical protecting our physical environment profitable. What are the business models that we need to find to make protecting our emotional and societal integrity profitable?
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Yes.
That's awesome. I think that's an awesome note to end on. I've had a fantastic conversation. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much,
Likewise.
Amir. Yeah, for being our first guest on the podcast, and couldn't be happier. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for checking us out. We'll have some links in the show notes. This is a brand new podcast, so tell your friends because we need followers. And we'll be setting up a Patreon. This will be the first effort that we've ever set up with a Patreon. You can check that out, or just send us a coffee. There'll be links on the page. And keep in touch. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks. It was fun.
Thank you, Amir. Ciao.